Okay. Anshu Dash, thank you very much for coming on. And I know we have been in the past, like a couple of times, actually last week, right? We discussed briefly um, a lot of geopolitical stuff, and then I have been following your posts and what you're writing, and in intelligentsia level, right? And about the geopolitics and how India is progressing. And I will tell you where I come from. I come from a small neighboring country, Sri Lanka, even though I live in
Wow.
Canada, right? And then I see that I have been able to work with the think tank companies here, and I see major debacles in the South Asian region. Why we cannot achieve prosperity, and Sri Lanka. If I give you a little brief of a history, like in Sri Lanka is one of the first countries in the South Asian region that achieved the highest middle income status somewhere around 2013, even after a 30-year brutal war, even after some communal wars. And then in 88, 89, we had a JVP insurrection. And despite all these problems, right, Sri Lanka still achieved the highest middle income status. I think right now it is the second. I think Maldives is number one now, right? So we achieved that status before India, before Bangladesh, before Pakistan, all these countries. And then, since then, we have been kind of like muddling through right now, and we are bringing leaders, and then realize after a while, okay, we won't be able to achieve it. We bring another one, and then we won't be able to achieve it. And then in utter desperation, back in 2022, there were riots in the country all of a sudden, right? And this all a kind of like I can see a synonym, how, a synonymous pattern, right? How it happened in Europe. Even in Europe, as you know, that there was a period where they were kind of like not being able to understand how to bring the best of Europe. So they brought a lot of leaders and they dumped them. Again, brought another one and then they dumped them. Finally, the epiphany hits, and they figured out a different way to achieve the prosperity, which basically gave rise to the Europe and also to many other countries, including America and Canada. And that is where we are right now. And this regional prosperity has been, in my view, is the way that other smaller countries develop. And but now looking at coming back to India, right? I don't see a way forward for India. I think they may develop up to some extent, but I don't see a developed India in probably in my lifetime. And but I will give you the flow because you have been arguing it won't be the case. You are arguing in your posts and in your writings and everywhere. You are arguing against my presumption. So I will give you the flow right now to elaborate how India started and the way you want it, and elaborate it for us, please. Thank you.
Right. So I want to do this without too much Indian triumphalism, but I'm obviously there's something about modern India that's quite similar to what America classically was, which is a very optimistic place, despite all our problems, despite all the arguments we have with each other. See, it's not empty optimism. Let me just rattle off a couple of statistics. This is unprecedented because people always compare you to China, they forget these couple of statistics. For the past 41 years, there has not been a single year, uh, besides 35, so it's a very good ratio, in which India's growth rate has been below 6%. That is unprecedented in human history, and there's every indication, every single major, the World Bank says it, the IMF says it, every major investor says it, that for the next 20 years that's supposed to be the case. Now, my contention is that's not enough. 6% is not enough. We're getting 6.5% last year. That's not enough. Can we become a developed country? And I'm just starting with India. I'll just fan out to the rest of the region, but I'll talk about, can India become a developed country? Yes and no, depending on the definition of developed. Will we become Japan? Obviously not. But can India aspire to the level of prosperity in today's China by 2040? That's eminently possible. Oddly enough, I also think that's possible for Bangladesh if they get their politics together. And the reason you talk about Sri Lanka is one of those things where they did the economics right long before they did their politics right, and that's something I always think is the wrong way to go. You first need to have that bit of clarity in your country, a sense of who are we, right? If you get that wrong, then no matter what else you do, at some point it's going to collapse. And you talk about, I'll be a little harsh. I don't think what happened in Sri Lanka can be described as communal tensions. What I saw, at least till the 2000s, was apartheid. And just like South Africa after apartheid, it got out of apartheid, but it could never get back to a good economy. So that level of political division is not communal tension. That level of political division is literal apartheid. And that's really causes a sort of sclerosis. And the only way you break that sclerosis is through extreme left measures, which then destroy your economy. So there's a very vicious circle. So you can't get your politics strong and your economics right. India is on the path to getting its politics wrong. And had last year's general elections not happened, I would have said we would have also done something like Sri Lanka and become an apartheid state, and probably ended up in a position where something like 2009 would have happened to Indian Muslims at some point. And then the only way to get out of that would have been very left-wing politics that speaks in favor of Muslims, and then you have your economy completely coming unstuck. Right, so why do I think India is in a position? Instead of saying developed country, non-developed country, I'll give you exact numbers. When do I think India is going to get to the level of the average level? By the way, you talk about India as if it's just one small place. I mean, Tamil Nadu already has a higher rate of development than Sri Lanka. Kerala has the same level. Telangana has a higher level. Himachal Pradesh has a higher level. So it's not, India is not a monolith. It's many countries in one. So the many countries are actually already doing better. So it's definitely possible. And a couple of things. What India has is what China had between 1990 to 2010, a demographic dividend. Right? So at least to 2041 to 45, no matter how you dice the numbers, India's working age population will remain the larger section of the population. And alongside strong government capex and infrastructure, and lots of private investment in things like, let's say, the deep tech startup. The deep tech startup ecosystem, you have a very diversified economy. Now, what did Sri Lanka grow on the basis of? They were mostly, correct me if I'm wrong, exports of commodities with very little value add. So there was never something like, for example, a space tech sector. There was never, for example, what India is trying to do in terms of making and exporting green hydrogen. There's no attempt to so where India's strength comes in, and which is, by the way, replicable by Sri Lanka as well, if it gets its politics right and integrates with the Indian economy. So another reason the reason I'm not that pessimistic about India is also the reason I'm not pessimistic about South Asia, because the thing in South Asia is these countries say they hate India, the countries that do say it, by the way, are the same countries that actually do not hate India. They hate their minorities, and that's reflected in their hate for India. So, for example, just think about this simple thing. The Tamil Nadu economy alone, forget about the Indian economy, it manufactures more than any European country except Germany. Not India, Tamil Nadu. and it's just there. It's just you just need a small little bridge that connects the two of the country, Sri Lanka to Tamil Nadu, and suddenly you have this huge economic engine you're linked to. Then you have Bangladesh, which for a long time actually did very, very well. Under Sheikh Hasina, it quadrupled its economy, its GDP per capita became higher than India, etc. But now it's in turmoil, it's sort of, stagnating, and it's getting into bad ideas. But I think these won't last. I don't think they will last. Sri Lanka's beginning to come out of the cycle. There is genuine interest in terms of, at least at the leadership level in all parties, to sort of integrate economically with India, to make use of that growth engine. And Pakistan's demographic dividend begins in 2035, actually. So it's a much larger problem. So 2035 to 2055 is when they can actually grow. So as bleak as things look now, if Pakistan can find a way to be friends with India by 2035, its economy grows not even by doing anything, just simply telling the manufacturers in Maharashtra, not Maharashtra, in the north, in UP, Rajasthan, etc., that we'll give you a route through which to send your goods to, overseas. Use our ports, use Karachi port. Right? Sometimes that's all they need to do. Or just simply allow lots and lots of Indians to go as tourists. So the thing is, there is a great opportunity in South Asia, and it's largely because, again, I'm a bit of a chauvinist, because I don't call it South Asia, I call it the Indian subcontinent. And then the reason the Indian subcontinent can grow to these, there is real potential, is that once you get your politics right, and by the way, India was very close to not getting its politics right, so I'm not lecturing anybody, I'm saying it's possible anyway. So once you get your politics right, it's possible very much to actually grow on a variety of scales. For example, India's economy and a growth potential is on 4 or 5 things. There need to be some reforms in agriculture, which are being thought about, which can suddenly make Indian exports either the third or fourth in the world. We're already 7th, so it's not inconceivable. And the next is manufacturing, in which India is not usually spoken about in manufacturing; it's usually spoken about in services. But I think a month or two ago, the World Bank came up with a report that said, at $781 billion, now India manufactures more than any other country on earth except China, the USA, Japan, and Germany. So there's that possibility, and it's growing, and there's manufacturing not just in high-tech industries like semiconductors, but also like shoes and toys. But then you also have, for example, things like shipbuilding, which India is really trying to get into. And there's another opportunity, by the way. China's economy is slowing down. I'm not saying it's collapsing. I never make that hyperbole. It is not collapsing at all, but it's certainly slowing down. And not only is it slowing down, it's starting to rub a lot of people in the West in the wrong way, which leads to a China plus one rerouting of global supply chains, of which India is a big beneficiary, Southeast Asia is a big beneficiary. I see no reason why Sri Lanka cannot be a big beneficiary, especially since Tamil Nadu is such a big beneficiary. It's right there. It's right there. I mean, you don't even have to, like, all the arguments that the Sri Lankans usually make is, look, our GDP per capita is more than you, things are blah, blah, blah. If you compare that to Tamil Nadu, all those arguments just are completely blown out of the water. Like, look at every development indicator is better than Sri Lanka. The economy of that one state is like double or something like that of Sri Lanka. So it's possible. So there's a lot of possibility. But now I'm going to flip it over and I'm going to tell you about what the bad things are, why it could be terrible, where I see no hope, where I share your vision of bleakness. Because I do as well. When it comes to the environment, I mean, I don't want to be I'm not speaking Greta Thunberg terms, I'm talking about in very clear, visible terms. The most polluted cities on Earth on earth are in India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. And if you go using our model, pretty much it's going to be Colombo next. So there's that real possibility. And that's largely because of the very inefficient way in which manufacturing is done. It's very coal intensive, but it's also very water intensive. There's not much thought given to how these things, how, for example, even agriculture, like stubble burning, should be taken, should be stopped, etc. There's a lot of dumping. But there's one thing in which, although I see incomes growing, I don't have a problem with that. I think South Asia as a whole, over the next 15, 20 years, we'll see enormous reductions in poverty. We'll see enormous increases in the overall middle class and our consumption, etc. What I don't see, for example, is any real thought, at least it could change. At least for now, I think it's going to get worse and worse and worse in terms of congestion, in terms of land use, in terms of groundwater depletion, all these things. It's a pretty bleak scenario out there. And this happens at a time, by the way, where your cyclones are much more regular, much worse, when forest fires are much more regular, much worse, and there are water wars already, because the last India-Pakistan war ended up becoming a water war, because that's also what's happening with India and China, and increasingly likely between India and Bangladesh. So, on the one hand, there's a lot of hope and possibility when it comes to the environment, and by the way, this will have an impact on growth as well, because a negative impact. Because you can't just grow when your cities are toxic dumps, because one thing that you cannot disagree about India today is pretty much every major city, even the ones which are the most innovative, which are doing the most amazing things, for example, like you go to Hyderabad in India, there are these amazing space tech startups, amazing green tech startups, amazing work that is being done, for example, in agri-tech and in terms of nanotechnology, in terms of pharmaceuticals, etc. But what you have at the same time in Hyderabad is you can't drive without genuinely feeling suffocated. You can't walk around without feeling suffocated. And that's true of every major city in India. And the second it rains, everything's just flooded. There's very little planning in terms of drainage, etc. And that's what we see in Bangladesh and Pakistan as well. And very, very unbearably hot summers, to which the reaction is buy more air conditioners, which makes things worse, right? Because then it feeds a cycle. So how do you deal with that question? That is an important question. And just again, to give you a scary statistic, to just remind you that I'm not just a very positive person. Delhi, a couple of years ago, not even that long ago, had a summer temperature of 50-point-something degrees Celsius. And we're trying to build an economic model which, Beijing's never that hot. New York's never that hot. Berlin's never that hot. So we're basically building a model where there's a lot of growth potential, and there are very good signs that it's going to be realized. And there's some optimism about Sri Lanka, genuine optimism that Bangladesh will return to political normalcy in 5-10 years' time. A great optimism for that. Very little, but some optimism for Pakistan. I have, sadly, not that much optimism about Nepal, because it's very, it's unlucky where it's located. If there's no ocean anywhere near it, and it's essentially completely landlocked, and it's between India and China, there are lots of mountains, hard to build infrastructure for that. Nepal will have to be the country that all of us essentially, if we want them to succeed, which I do, I love Nepalis, we essentially have to treat them as the people we donate money to, rather than expecting anything to come out of that country. Be that as it may, this is the picture I see. But unless we think hard about this particular problem, that's gone, and I go back to the political problem. How could it get better? How could it change? Why do I say India was very, very close to becoming a failed state politically, because on the one hand, it doesn't look like that. Right? I mean, it's a country that, whatever else you think about it, the degree of violence in India, if you compare that to Pakistan or Bangladesh or Sri Lanka during the troubled years, is nothing. It's pretty much nothing. It's very well reported on. I mean, it's sensationalized a lot. If you look at the hard numbers, any Sri Lankans that lived through those years will say, this is a joke. Are you really telling me this is a country on fire? However, if the mindset changes, the institutions get rigged in a certain direction. Because ultimately, all of this progress that I'm talking about is based on the idea of inclusive, democratic institutions. And in this case, why is it so important? Why can China and Vietnam afford not to be democratic? And why do we desperately need to be democratic? It's a very valid question. China is mostly Han. I think it was something like over 90% Han Chinese, one ethnicity, mostly one language, right? They all understand the same language. Vietnam, tiny country, everyone has more or less speaks the same language. There are ethnic divisions, but it's not really that much. That's not the concern. Sri Lanka, Sinhalese, Tamils, Muslims. India, 30 official languages, 1,000 actual languages, every religion on earth, atheists, every political persuasion you can think of. If its democracy doesn't work, all this economic stuff, all this fancy economic logic that I gave you, just goes straight out of the window. And one reason why Pakistan has never developed, although it had a chance, in the 1960s it was actually doing better than all of us. Because then it started to become a society where the military takes over all the time, and it crushes people, and then it crushes ethnicities, and then some would say that's how it was set up, and it's a design problem rather than an action problem. I'm not going to go to that; it's a long debate. And then you look at Nepal. Nepal is another country that could do well if it gets its politics right, but its politics is not wrong for the reasons our politics are problematic. In its case, they haven't really come to a conclusion, a sort of consensus position about whether they want a monarchy, whether they want a Hindu state or a secular state. And this is, by the way, a mostly culturally homogenous country. They could do it much more easily, but they're always in this sort of dilemma. And since monarchy was abolished in 2008 until now, not a single Nepali prime minister has completed the term in office. It's been 1 year, 1.5 years at best. It's been sort of a musical chairs, and that leads to no investment because there's no stability. That's a problem. So, and Bangladesh, it used to do phenomenally well under Hasina. So it was in a position like Bangladesh was already boasting by 2045 we are going to be a world-leading power. Why? Because of a couple of things. Because their growth model was based primarily on garments. Obviously, we were trying to diversify primarily on garments. They were able to do something that even India is finding hard to do, is employ a disproportionate number of women. And this again goes back to the social dynamics of it. The more empowered the women are, because in that case they had to be because they were the ones who could do the stitching and stuff. That's the nature of that particular industry. You suddenly have great social mobility, and remember, money in the hands of women. This is always, there's a lot of good studies in development economics that show this. If the woman in the family has money, they invest in their children's education. They do a lot of things they're less likely to drink it away. They're less likely to throw it away. At least, it's not true for everybody, but it's in the aggregate, it's very well established that that's the case. And that's what Bangladesh had. But now, after the fall of Hasina, it's chaotic. It's sort of this crazy pan-Islamist ideas, and nobody's really thinking about economic growth. But I don't think it's going to be for a long time, because Bangladeshi society as a whole is a lot more resilient. But once it gets back, then again, the biggest hope for South Asia is, again, the reason I never use the word South Asia, the term South Asia, I talk about the Indian subcontinent. Because you have this big engine of growth. All people have to do is just tie themselves to it. There's a lot to grow. And by the way, for Sri Lanka, you don't even have to have an India strategy. You have a Tamil Nadu strategy. Simply that. And then you have every major, like everybody from Foxconn to Apple, everybody's trying to move there. Everybody's trying to set up businesses there. Tamil Nadu is growing at 10.5%. That's ridiculous. It's not growing at the 6% that India is growing at. So if it were a country, all of a sudden, you'd be. I'm pretty sure you'd be talking about how this is going to be the next Germany, right? So, but to end there, that's another. Now this comes to India's particular problem. So I talked about a lot of the strengths, and I talked about, for example, India's like ecological problems, which exist everywhere. But here I have to talk about certain issues with distribution. Although I'm sure India will grow, I'm not sure Bihar will grow. Although I'm sure, for example, the top 10% of the Indian economy will be in the next 10 years, not even 10 years, as rich as Western Europe. I'm pretty sure that's going to happen. But what about the rest of the 90% of the country? Their boats are still rising. I'm not a communist, I'm not saying that's not happening, but it's too slow. And this is, even from a sort of market perspective, this is bad because if you have very low demand in the economy, because it's coming from very few people, you don't have enough private players coming in to invest. Even today, you go to any Indian company, they have an India One strategy and an Indian Two strategy. India One is for the 200 million to 400 million people in India who really consume and spend. That's a large number. That's enough for any company. But then you have almost a billion people who are not really doing that well, who are not really spending that well, who are largely dependent on handouts. And whether you call it socialism or not, you really have to do that because otherwise the country falls apart. So you are in this position where at least 400 million people are dependent on direct benefit transfers, on rations provided by the state. And this is a state that's trying to be a very developed country. Whereas, it's developing very well in a very haphazard, very badly distributed manner. Do I think this is a problem that India cannot get over? No, because we still have 20 years in which to get all of our policies right. But it has to start now. Any thinking has to start now. And to begin with, India has the most appalling investment in healthcare of any G20 nation. It spends something like 1.4% of its GDP on healthcare, and 21 out of 28 states in India have, less than the WHO recommendations that you should have a doctor for every 1,000 people. That's simply not the case in 21 of 28 states. So in a strange way, in just 10 years, I'm pretty sure that Tamil Nadu, Maharashtra will be like any middle-ranking European country. So Maharashtra will be exactly like Poland today, or Canada today. But how do you do that for the whole nation? That can still be done, but that's something we really have to think about now. Because the only good thing is demographics gives you time. But that's 15 years, not an eternity. I close here.
Okay. So thank you for elaborating, right? And the question that I ask, and for about half an hour right now. But from now on, like I would like to start a couple of questions, and kind of like in a rapid fire style, right? And because that will be helpful for some of our viewers. I go back to, like, I know you try to paint a picture like how India can be and will be successful. And still, in my view, you did not quash my presumption, and but I'm not going to argue on that, right? And it's your view. But I would like to bring a couple of points here. Your own Indian economists, Ratin Roy and Indermit Gill, I pointed that out to you earlier too, right? And they have basically come up in broader terms, they have looked at India And they have clearly mentioned with facts and figures and everything why India would stuck in middle income trap forever if India continues this. What is your counter argument for that? If you can give like quickly your counter arguments, then we can move on to the next.
Yeah, the counter argument is Ratin Roy's counter argument. He says if. You're forgetting that if part of it. He says the same thing I said. We still have 15 years in which, because of our demographics, we have 15 years in which to fix all of these problems. If we fix them, sure. Because one of the things that keeps you stuck in a middle income trap is if you have this level of regional sort of disparity. And the easiest way to change that, for example, is to have manufacturing in Bihar that sells not to the world, let Tamil Nadu sell to the world, manufacture things in Bihar to sell to Tamil Nadu. So instead of visualizing India as one country, start visualizing India as a miniature EU in which the places that are not doing so well can do low-tech stuff. And that is very labor intensive, brings a lot of employment, brings a lot of consumption because they have employment. And then that's a way you can go. So India actually, the solutions to India's problems lie within our problems. Like this is one problem. The other problem is, why are countries stuck in the middle income trap? Like in the
But
middle.
I would like to add that to what you said. When it comes to Dr. Indermit Gill, he clearly outlined, right, and with the numbers, that India's women population, 23% of your women population do not contribute in any way to the economy. He has clearly showed that. But can you tell me what Modi government has done to improve it?
No, he hasn't. That's why I don't vote for him. But that's why I'm like, well, like I said, there's 15 years. He's not going to be in power in 2029, after 2029, given what happened to him in 2024. So I have, like I said, all of these problems are real. All of these problems are serious. If they're not solved by 2040, they'll never be solved till the end of time.
Why do you think it will be solved by 2040?
No, I'm saying I'm outlining a plan because I'm going to argue my case and get it done. One thing that happens in India, if you argue about something long enough, we find a way. That's usually what's happened. Somebody tells you this is a major problem and yells about it, other people debate, and after a while that's actually done. Because this is what, that's what's happening with the FTAs. People were completely like saying India can never grow unless we have FTAs, unless we actually connect ourselves to the West and economies.
So you're saying Modi hasn't done anything yet, but are there forces behind him, or are there forces? Yeah, let me ask: like, are there forces behind him that is stifling, giving more freedom to women and letting them come out? And are there hidden forces behind him that's blocking this progress of women?
A couple of things. Actually, no, it's because of the thinking has been wrong. So what employs women? What employs women are garments industries. We don't have a big garments industry. So we've basically been a services-oriented industry. And the other thing that employs a lot of women are healthcare work. So the solution to this problem is actually very simple. It's never been done by Modi because he doesn't think about these things. He thinks about fancy things like green hydrogen and semiconductors and stuff like that, which is fine, but it's not going to get you massive women employment. Bangladesh, which has 3 times the number of women employed than India, is for a very simple reason. The garments industry is going to, you need women to stitch. It's so simple. I mean, India's problems are so deep, but also the solutions are also very, very intuitive and simple.
But again, I'm going to reiterate and ask the same question again. Are there forces? I know, like, you may be hesitant to mention, but by parties or forces, some kind of forces behind the Modi government that's stifling women progress? That's my question.
I wouldn't say so. I mean, even though I'm not a fan of Mr. Modi, he wants to at least do something for women. But he's not doing the simple things. He's doing things like, I'm going to increase women's education and so, which is wonderful. But that's going to give you dividends 20 years down the line. Bring a garments industry, that's going to bring in dividend 2 years down the line. Bring, increase healthcare spending, get more healthcare workers, have nurses training colleges, have, elderly care. That's going to increase in like if within 5 years. It's a
Okay.
simple technical solution. This is why actually there's a good study that says from what is now 25% women's employment, which is appalling, it can go very easy to 50, 55% simply with this very simple solution. Then you have the education stuff, which gives you, gradual results. But this is like immediate. This is not very difficult actually. And the reason it hasn't been done, okay, the real reason it hasn't been done, now I can get to that, because he tries to do all his manufacturing in the states that are successful, not in the states that aren't successful. That model of thinking hasn't happened, which Ratan Roy talks about. Why aren't we manufacturing in Bihar, in Jharkhand, in Uttar Pradesh, instead of trying to manufacture everything in Maharashtra, in Tamil Nadu, in states like that, right? So once you get to that thing, because we're doing manufacturing very well, the fifth largest manufacturer in the world. It's not that we can't do it, because the numbers don't give any evidence for that kind of pessimism. But yes, the thing about Ratan Roy and Anandamith Gill, which you said, is I completely agree with their assessment. But you forget that their assessment is all, if we don't do this, that's when it's going to get stuck in the middle income trap. They never said that's deterministic. I know Ratan Roy personally. He doesn't think it's deterministic either.
Okay, let me ask you another one. Is it because of like what do you feel about the whole Mahabharat concept? The Mahabharat concept in our point of view here, right, is kind of like feeding into nationalism, heavy nationalism. And that's what the outside world, I don't know what Indians thinking, but that's how the outside worlds look at India.
Akhand Bharat.
Sorry.
You're talking about Akhand Bharat. The idea of
They say but Bharat concept, right? But we call in here like Mahabharat, but this whole Bharat concept, even Ratin Roy talking about it, right? The whole Bharat concept, right? And then but when we look at the birth of India, which I mean the constitution, the constitution making, right? And then what Ambedkar's speeches, right? And Ambedkar delivered like wonderful speeches to the Constitutional Assembly, completely redefining what Hindutva is, right? And how the Hindutva, that powerful nationalist concepts can be used for India, right? For India's benefits. And that was his intention. But now then, me being outside and looking at what your activists such as like Arundhati Roy, right, and what she is preaching, and how people are lynched on streets, and how Muslims are discriminated, and all these things, right? Do you think Ambedkar's vision is right now in India, right? It's happening in India in under Modi's government. What's your take on that?
okay, I alluded to this before, but let me explain. In one word, no, but it's not as simple as that. Uh, again, I'm not trying to excuse anything, but again, look at the hard numbers. Look at the number of lynchings. Look at the number of cases of actual discrimination. Take it in terms of proportion compared to Sri Lanka's conflict years. It's a joke. These numbers are a joke. I mean, you have 100 lynchings in total in 10 years, 10 per year, in a country of 1.4 billion. It's terrible. Each one of them, I give my deepest sympathies to every single person. But again, let's have perspective, right? This is a
So
bit
you
ridiculous.
justify, even for me, like being in this country in Canada,
No, it's
me being like even one person is enough. Like, so you kind of like justify to
no,
me, or you
no,
not.
no, I'm getting to that. No, I'm not. No, I'm not. I oppose this person. I think it's a dangerous trend. But so I'm not justifying, because one of the reasons I'm very strongly against Modi is because of Hindutva. What I'm trying to tell you is the opposition to Hindutva is far stronger, which is what he realized, because it's a simple thing. There's this famous case of Babri Masjid being destroyed. It's a famous mosque built by Babur, the Mughal emperor. It was destroyed, and he built the Ram Mandir, the temple to the Lord Ram, there. It's a majority Hindu constituency, something like 80-85% of Hindu. He lost that very single constituency 4 months after he built that temple. That's what I'm saying. And what was the campaign about? The campaign was very simple. He said, I'm going to fight this election on Ram, which is the Hindu god Ram, and on this whole concept. And well, the opposition did nothing. It just held up a copy of the Indian constitution like this. So the message given by the opposition was just hold a copy of the constitution like this, go and vote. And this is a country with one of the poorest populations in the world, one of the least educated populations in the world. They went out and he has lost his parliamentary majority. He was thinking he would win 400 seats. He won 240. Not enough to defeat. That'll happen 5 years from now. So that's what I'm trying to get at. I'm not justifying. It's terrible. That's why I'm anti-Modi. What I'm saying is, the reason I was trying to put it in perspective is not that I'm justifying it, but the saying is given how solvable the problem is, and given how much the strength of the opposition is, given that he's losing state after state when he's trying to do that. So the thing is, the funniest thing is, he was in every single poll in February 2024 said, and I was actually thinking of leaving India. That's serious. I thought this is it. India is finished. I was the theologian. Minorities have no place here. Liberals have no place here. It's completely. This is no longer a place for. We are going down the path that Sri Lanka went, that Pakistan went, that Israel is now in. That's the kind of place we were going to be in, or Russia now is. And then all of a sudden, that's February 24. Everybody's saying May 24, June 24. It's a done deal. He's not only going to win, he's going to win enough seats to fundamentally change the Indian constitution and make it, and remove the word secular, remove the word socialist, make it a really sort of Hindu state. Not only did it not happen, in the most astonishing ways, he almost lost his own seat. He had great difficulty winning his own seat. The very constituency in which he had done his most precious deed. So imagine this. Imagine that the Israelis bulldoze the Al-Aqsa Mosque, build the Temple Mount, hold an election in Jerusalem, most of the voters will be Jewish, and lose that election. That's what happened.
Okay. Now let's dissect to another area, right? When I came here, I work with, as I said, in my previous company, that I work with a couple of Canadian think tanks, and they one of the very obvious questions they asked me, Ernest, your region has 2.5 billion people, but then it was only about mere 2 trillion economy. The region, not only India, but the whole region, right? And so they were asking the various reasons. So I pointed out as to my what's that?
When were they asking this?
That was 2004. That was in 2004, right? And only 2.5 billion people, and having only mere 2.5 trillion dollar economy, right? And so I was explaining various reasons, including that we were colonized and all the wealth was transported to the West and all that. Then they brought counter arguments, say not only India was colonized, but even Britain was not colonized, but Britain was attacked multiple times by Viking attacks and all that. Every country was attacking in certain period of era, right? In one way or the other, right? But the thing is, they were telling me, when India will be developing, India probably may have a sort of a different trajectory of development than the Western development, and it will have its unique Indian culture, Indian roots of that development. But now, when I look back, the past reports, various economic reports coming out, right? Every Indian startup company that was recently started is a copycat of the US economy, US startup companies. Is basically a copycat, right? And so I don't see this thing. It happened to China too. And I don't see India is sort of trying to create its own different kind of economy that is at least fair bit by fair bit amount decoupled with the West. What is your what do you say to that?
Well, a couple of things. I mean, there's a lot of deep tech startups that do very original work, so that's not true. But Most of them, you're right, most of them are copycats. And the reason is very simple. The goal right now, for the next 10 years at least, is not to do innovations, but to do business well. So actually, what the first thing we want to do is like have enough money in the startup sector. Another 10 years, you'll have 1 million startups, which is doable, which is where India's trying to go. Let's say 90-95% will be completely copycats. Because first, you have the base of money, because to do real innovation, you need to lose a lot of money. You need to actually be able to invest in places where most of what you're doing will go wrong. And that's okay, that's how things work. We don't have that kind of capital at the moment. So right now the reason is go for what's worked. Just don't try to innovate for the moment. I mean, there's some deep tech startups do amazing innovation, but that's like less than 5%. That's just Hyderabad. The city of Hyderabad does it. The rest of India is doing copycat innovation. That's fine. Till 2035, the goal is to get to 1 million startups. Doesn't matter what quality, just get to 1 million startups and get to the kind of money that you can then invest in doing really original, interesting work. Because we have time, we have till 2045. There's no hurry. We don't have to like prove anything to anybody right now. So the whole point about India is, and not just about India. I said about every single country in South Asia, except Nepal, which they'll have to be our baby. We have to take care of them. There's nothing that can be done about Nepal. My apologies to my organization is based in Nepal, so I'll probably hear a lot. Anyway, they have to be our baby. But aside from Nepal, all of them, if all we do is to try to get to a certain level of basic wealth, then you have the money and the ability to really play interesting games. And for India in particular, it's a different thing. The way India can really, really develop and get past all these log jams, and I'm not talking about the ecology thing, where I'm completely depressed. That's one thing where I see no hope at all. Not in the next 20 years, not in the next 25 years. Let's put that aside. That I'm completely like it's done. That goose is cooked. But when we talk about, for example, getting to a certain level where you treat India not as one country. The problem with treating India as one country isn't ever going to solve these problems.
No,
If
we
you
are
treat
not.
at least the
No,
three blocks,
no. We very well understand India is not one country. Like India has like
no, but it's run
multiple
as one.
languages.
No, but it's not. But it's run as one country. That's why it's failing.
No, but does
No,
India understand? Let me ask you, like majority of Indians, do they understand that the mindset of the regional countries, mainly not the common people, but even in the intelligentsia of those countries, is India is our bane and pain as well. When India is not developing and when India doesn't have a sort of a cohesive strategy for the region, we all suffer. And that's actually the mindset in other countries. I can talk to the people in the people from Bangladesh here, and I can facilitate another discussion like this, and these are like very intelligent people and working in these companies, right? And I can facilitate another discussion. And our pain and also our bane basically is India. And because we had centuries of stagnation in India, and that stifled the progress, the growth,
that's
and
no longer
and
the case. That's no longer the case. My point is slightly different, which I had said, which is slightly impolite, but I'll have to make it because it's very important. Even if it's very impolite, it's very important. So, with the exception of Nepal and Bhutan, what problem do the other countries have with India? They're actually projections of their internal problems. So India has to understand we cannot solve it. Because, for example, if Sri Lanka really needs to grow, if it really wants to have a path to success, even in terms of innovation, some of the best stuff happens in IIT Chennai, by the way. You'll have to basically tether yourself to the Tamil Nadu economy. Given your history, that's next to impossible. Again, with Bangladesh, they did very well under Sheikh Hasina, but they're not doing very, very well now. Why is that? Why is that? It's not something we can do. They have a problem with their own 1971 revolution, and they have a problem with their own minorities, which they project as, Indian. They see the Hindus as Indians, just like you saw Tamils as Indians. So essentially, I cannot solve that. India has to understand that, it may be your concern. I understand all the critics, but I cannot solve a problem that's in your own head.
No,
With the more you should do a lot of
yeah, I very well understand those countries, right? Individual countries, they have their own
And
problems.
Pakistan, we have to, like, one thing that India has to do is to not consider Pakistan as part of the Indian subcontinent. That's a problem that will not be solved in the next 15, 20 years. It can be solved, but not in the next 15, 20 years.
But Anshu, but at the same time, I know when Sri Lanka went into economic collapse, right, back in 2022, India helped a lot. They absolutely help a lot, right?
And the funny thing is, the Tamil foreign minister and the Tamil finance minister helped you a lot. I don't know if this message is being sent in Sri Lanka. It's not just that Indians helped, Tamils helped.
No, they did absolutely. Everybody collectively, right? In India came in a diplomatic way, and in many ways, India helped, like to get like pass by that problem, right? That is true. But at the same time, do you understand that majority of even Sri Lankans, even Bangladeshis, the mindset of those people still, if you do a survey right now, there are a bunch of surveys were done. It's basically anti-Indian. I would say it's basically anti-Indian, except because there are very obvious reasons in Sri Lanka. I'm not right. Even this discussion, why we having this discussion is to build these bridges, and that is what the task is, right?
Yeah, but we have to understand that's not something that we prioritize. We're going to try. This is where India has to be very ruthless, actually. We have very good friends. It's not that we don't have friends. The problem is having friends in the region, and we have to basically tell the region, look, sort your things out, try to be friends with us, you'll grow. If not, sorry, we have friends. If Kenya wants to be friends with us,
diplomatic relations, very good diplomatic relations.
I'm talking economics. For example, the depth of what is now developing India-Indonesia ties, the depth of India-Vietnam ties, the depth of India-Filipino ties, the depths of India-Taiwan ties, the depths of India-Kenya ties, the depths of India's ties to Argentina, which is nowhere near India, and Chile, which is nowhere near India. So the thing is, those things are growing very well and very deeply. So at some point, these countries in our region, with the exception again of Nepal, which in their case, it's like a younger brother. We don't mind what they say. We basically will have no matter what they tell us. That's a different issue. But
explain us, Anshu. I want you to explain to our people in Sri Lanka, right, what India is doing, right, sort of like subdue or quash this anti-Indian sentiments in these countries. What is India doing?
Patience, nothing else. You have to allow this, whatever, like, for example, the sentiment in Sri Lanka was much worse against India in 2021 than it is now, because of the health, because of the economic stuff. So the only thing we can do is be patient and let the economics change people's minds. That's just it. So there's nothing more that we can do, because these are not our problems. They're problems within the minds of these countries. So all India can do is, like, we have to grow, and if you have we'll all be, this thing will be there. If you're not Pakistan, that's one country, let's take that aside. If you're not Pakistan, if you're any South Asian country, you're in trouble, we're always ready to help. But beyond that, again, I cannot solve your personal problems. So the India's strategy is to just avoid it. Like, basically, that's the only thing we have to do.
But I don't think it is going to work, and because most of the countries, like even if I go back to the history, Canada, America, and Mexico, right, and had open debates, open discussions within the societies, right, about like how we can sort of like subdue these differences and come together as a giant force in North American region. Okay, but let's dissect to, sorry, not let's divert to another area.
One small point. I'll push back on this just a bit. There's a very, very famous statement in Mexico. I'll say it in Spanish first, and I'll say it back in English. Pobre México, tan lejos de Dios y tan acerca de los Estados Unidos. Poor Mexico, so far from God and so close to the United States. So this has never been. This has not never been a. This is a problem that America also has. So again,
Yeah.
I'll push back against the idea, and you know what is going on between America and Canada right now. So I don't think it's an Indian
Well,
problem. I
that
think
is
it's,
that's a totally different topic. I will tell you what's actually happening, but that let's have that discussion later. But let me ask you this. Now you're saying, okay, you are not a fan of Modi government. I understand that. But do you see after Modi, right? Do you see the next line of leaders are more liberal or more sort of
yeah, yeah, yeah.
who
Look,
are
India's
they?
always.
For
Uh,
example, like when we know like Mao Moitra, for example, I closely follow her, and Mao Moitra like very very liberal, but I don't see a huge fan base around her. Do you see
see,
other leaders that we don't see like?
yeah, the Congress Party and everything around it. You see, the thing is, people misunderstand Indian politics. We don't have one. So the thing is, this is how Indian policy works. Before Mr. Modi, we did not have one big leader. Then we go back to that. We're not going to have one big famous leader. So what happens in India is because every other party in India is very liberal, so that's not a problem. So in the entire opposition, you read their manifesto, you will get all your like everything you're talking about plus more. Like you probably this is most likely what's going to happen in 2029. The Congress Party will get something around 140 seats, and all these smaller parties like Mohammad Maitra's party, the TMC, and others will attach themselves, be a coalition. It used to be called the United Progressive Alliance between 2014 to 2004 to 2014. It'll have some name like that, and they'll because it's many parties, they won't choose anybody from any party. They'll just appoint, let's say, a technocrat, like Dr. Manmohan Singh was a technocrat. And so yes, I mean the problem is it's not that do I think there's going to be another liberal leader. Modi is an interruption of Indian liberalism. Modi is not is if you look at Indian politics from 1947 to now, 1947 to 2014, no one ever complained about Indian liberalism. So people forget that this is just a temporary problem, rather than thinking, oh, do I have other liberalism? No, this is a shift from the norm. So what will happen in 2029? Not some kind of earthquake. India just go back to normal. Remember, it was lauded as a democracy just 10 years ago. Sorry, 11 years ago.
That's not what you think like here. Okay, but that's not what we see when we see the speeches given by your foreign minister, like the pompous talk sometimes, and then delivering to the world. We see kind of like a very big pride. And as you know, right, I just want to bring over something from the history. Until Abraham Lincoln became the president of the United States, and until he actually showed his true empathy towards its not only to its people, but to the whole region, right? And there was no sort of a support to the United States from the region. And it was that kind of like the talk and the empathy and everything that comes from the big neighbor created the utopia for this region. But I don't see that from India coming.
No,
Right.
but the thing is that this is the problem. This is actually, you be careful what you wish for. Be very careful what you wish for. Because any progressive Indian prime minister would not be friendly with Sri Lanka. Any progressive, because you committed a genocide, got away with it, we haven't punished you for it. We haven't taken you to court for it. We haven't taken you to the ICJ for it. Not a single military leader. It was a genocide on the size of Gaza. So the problem is,
We have a different totally different idea. We actually didn't have a genocide. I
no,
know
the fact,
that's the way it is
the
being
fact,
characterized, right?
no,
But I want
the
to say
fact,
that when we can have that discussion later. It's not
no
no.
genocide.
I really I am no. I'm saying like I'm not a fan of the war, right? And I'm not a fan how it was resolved. And after that, like how we completely disregarded that community right now. I'm totally against those things, right? And because we studied together with Tamil people and we were brothers and sisters, and how their legitimate problems were sort of like put under the carpet right now. I'm totally against all of those, right? But
70,000 people killed in 4 months is a genocide, sir. This is not that's a lower number,
we
but
can
close
we,
that's
we
not
can
close to
discuss
one.
that. But if we bring that discussion up front right now, like we won't be able to make any
No,
bridges, right?
no. What I'm trying to say is something very simple. Remember, the person you praise, Arundhati Roy. You know what her views are about the Sri Lankan genocide, right? You know that she criticized the government for not taking you to court. So the problem
No,
is
I understand
the
that.
region, the region always says that they want liberal Indian leadership, but they don't understand what liberal Indian leadership is. Because if we become a liberal Indian, go back to being Indian liberals,
Mhm.
we will not allow Muhammad Yunus to do what he's doing to Bangladesh. We will not allow Pakistan to get away with what it's doing to Balochistan. 60,000 Balochis abducted in the last 10 years. So the thing is, you say you want a liberal Indian leadership. I'm not sure you do. I'm not sure you do. That's the thing. You
Why?
because
Because I get your point. I get your point. But that should be a separate discussion. Let's have that discussion because we
like
cannot
even
provide a
Myanmar,
solution.
like
Mhm.
even Myanmar, right? In 2017, the Burmese army commits. Well, you have a problem with the word genocide. I'll give you numbers. 28,000 Rohingya Muslims killed in a month. If Modi was not the prime minister, India would have invaded Myanmar. So the thing is, you say you want a liberal leadership, but you have to understand what that means. A liberal Indian government will defend democracy at home, will defend democracy abroad, and if we do defend democracy abroad, that's not something you like.
Well,
So the problem,
absolutely. No, like for example, democracy is not an issue, and I don't care like if it's India or some other god or even coming and trying to trying to have a deliver a better democracy in Sri Lanka. I am all for it.
no,
Not
but you know what that would have meant though. In 2009, if a truly liberal Indian prime minister had taken a step, which is the cowardly step, which Arundhati Roy, by the way, the person you cite, was very angry with him for not doing that. India should the Rajiv Gandhi should have never sent the IPKF to fight for the Sinhalese. We should have sent the Indian army to fight for the LTTE, fight for liberation of Tamil Eelam. That was the only moral position. That was the only moral position.
we can discuss that later. But right now, like because we going back to the past. Okay, like but the thing is, do you so you are sort of like in not a are you in really a pessimistic mode or you are in more optimistic mode that India will be able to overcome the middle income trap? In my view, like you
I'm pretty
think,
sure. I'm pretty sure we will. I'm pretty sure we will. You know, there've been terrible, predictions about India for the last 30 years. Each one has failed. And even my own prediction that in 2024 we will finally become a fascist state has failed. So in 1997, the idea that Indian democracy will not survive anymore has failed. So I am pretty sure that this is a country that doesn't, and it's not nationalism. This is borne out by the facts. But again, be very careful. That everybody, I've actually read a lot of like Sinhalese and Bangladeshi critiques of India, but when I read them more carefully, when they talk about they wanting a more liberal Indian government, they don't understand its implications. Every time they don't understand that the implications are not only will that government defend democracy, human rights at home, it will want to defend it there, and that's something they don't want though.
I don't think they don't want. I think for me, like if it's a democracy that will be propagated throughout the region, I'm all for it. Anyway, let's stop with that positive note, and we talk about more than an hour, right? And but this discussion should continue, and then I'm gonna arrange another maybe probably a panel discussion.
This one small thing to end. One thing, for example, one small thing. Although Hindutva is bad for India, and we're planning to get rid of it, it's very good for Sri Lanka. I'll tell you why. What the Hindutva thinks is it doesn't see what you did in 2009 as a genocide. What it sees is this is how you deal with terrorism. Get rid of the terrorists, use whatever force necessary to get rid of the terrorists, and then do a little bit of development work and bring them inside. That's what it's doing in Kashmir. That's its plan. And because it's Hindutva, again, it's a very fascinating thing. A Hindutva government sees itself, sees Sinhalese Buddhism as deeply connected to its sense of what Bharat is, right? So, actually, the funny thing is, just like you don't understand the implications of a liberal Indian government, you don't understand the implications of a right-wing Hindutva government, which is going to be far more pro-Sri Lanka, and is being far more pro-Sri Lanka than anybody else or any of us would have had appetite for, because it is not concerned about like what happened inside Sri Lanka. It's simply because it doesn't care about human rights in India. It doesn't care about human rights in Sri Lanka. What it sees is, these are these ancient cultures. Because one of the first things that Modi did, he didn't land in Colombo. He went straight to Anuradhapura and sprayed by the Bodhi tree. Because for these people, it's all about deep spiritual ties. And for that, because they don't care about human rights, democracy, secularism, socialism the way I do. What they care about is, these spiritual ties. The best possible government for Sri Lanka, actually, is the Hindutva government. And any progress that will happen in India-Sri Lanka ties will actually happen in the next 4 years. Because the Modi government has a deep vested interest in deepening ties with Sri Lanka. Every single RSS writer, you go back to the writings from the 1920s, they've always loved Ceylon. They used to call it Ceylon back in the day. So again, this is a strange thing. So they do not mention Molly Baikal. They don't care about Molly Baikal. For them, it's very simple. If they're terrorists, get rid of them. However many you kill, not a problem. That's why they support Israel, by the way. I think October 7 happened, so it doesn't matter how many you kill. You need to just get rid of them. So they don't see Sarath Fonsek as a bad person. They see him as a brave man. So this is actually something you have to understand. It goes silo by silo, right? For Sheikh Hasina, it's a very interesting thing. The liberals in India liked the fact that she was secular, and the Hindutva people liked the fact that she was keeping Islamism at bay. But now there's a big problem, so there's a deeper understanding there. But with Sri Lanka, this is actually the case. And with the Maldives, what they did was actually very, very, very interesting. They had a problem. There was a problem in India. Muizu actually came on an anti-India ticket. And then all of a sudden what happens is Modi does a lot of, because he doesn't see things in human rights terms. He thinks in terms of simply development and investment terms. He says, okay, so how much investment do you need? What kinds of things do you need? Okay, fine. So that's what they got to a number. Because if you just think in terms of investment, it's not about values, it's about a number. Then India matched that number, slightly exceeded it, and suddenly all the acrimony was gone and the ties were saved. So again, it's not always this, the same thing. And by the way, everybody who's saying that you're citing Arundhati Roy against Hindutva will also remember that Arundhati Roy really, 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 really does not like Sri Lanka.